You have no idea the level of morale that we were willing to do the very best we could, no matter what the expense, to take care of a wounded soldier. My name is William Clayton Petty. I'm a captain in the United States Navy Medical Corps.
We're going to do it the same way we did yesterday. I'll tell you to get it ready, throw it in, then let the handle flip, and then throw it.
When I was in Vietnam, I was in the Army. I later switched to the Navy because my son enlisted in the Navy. And I've been doing quite a number of things since I retired from the military, where I spent about 23 years off and on, either on active duty or in the reserves. And in about 1990, I finally put together enough information to publish a book on Vietnam. And the reason I did was because I wanted to share my experiences with others. At the time of the Vietnam War, I was in my training sessions. First, I was an intern at Triple Army Medical Center in Hawaii and taking care of Vietnam soldiers that were shipped from Vietnam for us to give them better care before they went home. And so I knew what it was about. And then I was sent to Brooke Army Medical Center in Fort Sam Houston, Texas, where I started a 3-year residency in anesthesia. And I knew that if the war was still going on, when I finished my residency, I would be sent to Vietnam on orders. And that is exactly what happened. When I finished my residency, 2 months later, I was in Vietnam serving as Chief of Anesthesia at the 24th Evacuation Hospital. When I got my orders for deployment to Vietnam, I took them and read them to my family, and they were very excited because they knew that I was going to go to Vietnam and expected it because I had told them for 3 years that if war was still going on, that I would be going to Vietnam to serve. When you first arrive at a hospital, you are shown around the hospital and you have to sign in different places. And my last sign-in was to go to the operating room and to see physicians and nurses working together on patients at that time. And so I was immediately exposed to what we did, and I was very impressed with the quality of service that was given patients in the operating room. The 24th Evacuation Hospital was the largest hospital in the southern part of South Vietnam. We had more excellent surgeons of different specialties than any other hospital in the area. The hospital mortality was only 2%. If you arrived at the hospital alive, you had a 98% chance that you would return home. And it was because the doctors and nurses worked so closely together on trauma every day, every night, doing the same thing. They learned to be a well-oiled machine in taking care of combat casualties. When I was in Vietnam, almost all of patients were brought to the hospital in a helicopter. The helicopter pad was right out the front door of the hospital. We could all hear it from where we were sleeping or doing anything else. When we heard the helicopters come, we ran to the operating room and got our equipment out because we knew that we would start taking casualties. How many? We had no idea. We knew we might be there. I remember once I was worked straight through for 48 hours before we finished the casualties coming. And I went back to my hooch and slept for 12 to 14 hours, and then we had some more casualties. But even today, when I hear a helicopter, I think for a minute that I better run to the operating room, but then I realize I'm thinking of those who dedicated their lives to taking care of patients. In mass casualties, and that's usually more than about 10 or 15 all at once for 3 to 4 operating rooms, we would be assigned to a table. When the first patient came, you took care of that patient. That was your patient. And As soon as that patient's surgery was finished, then you cleaned up, got ready for the next patient, and you did patient after patient after patient. Sometimes you had to ask for help if you were giving a lot of units of blood, for instance. I remember one case, we gave 102 units of blood before the patient was finished with their surgery and taken to the recovery room. During my time in Vietnam, I saw many different casualties. I saw some that just had a broken foot. But I remember one patient that I had nightmares almost every night after I left Vietnam for about 2 years, and now I still remember him. He was a 19-year-old soldier who was on patrol in the jungle, and he stepped on a landmine. And the landmine just happened to be one that came up out of the ground, and then it exploded. And it blew part of both legs, his arms, his eye, his jaw, and his genital area. The helicopter pilots picked him up quickly, and he was at our hospital within 30 minutes of his injury. He was comatose, but he was still alive. So we took him immediately to the operating room, and 5 different kind of surgeons arrived to start work once he was in the operating room. They had to do amputations of both legs above the knee. Then they had to do an amputation of his right arm at the shoulder and his left arm above the elbow. They also had to take his entire jaw away, and the urologist had to take both his penis and all of his genital organs away. And on examination, we found that both of his eardrums had been perforated. At the end of the case, which lasted 3 to 5 hours, he was taken to the recovery room on a ventilator because he couldn't breathe anymore, but he was still alive but comatose. And I was in charge of the ventilators in the hospital, and there weren't a lot. We didn't have enough. After 3 days, it was decided that we needed that ventilator for a neurosurgical patient that had come in, that we knew we could get him ready and sent back home. This particular patient, with all of these terrible injuries, we knew would never survive any kind of an airlift to home or even to Japan. So I had to make the decision, along with other surgeons, that we would disconnect him from the ventilator. So I disconnected him, and when I did, he died within a few moments, and it was a very touching moment for me, and I think that's why I still remember it today in such detail. I do remember another case that made me very proud of the medical corps and the United States government. There was a young man who was probably in his 20s, early 20s, and he was on patrol outside of a fire base. And surrounding the fire base at night were machine guns, and these machine guns were loaded with a special shell. And when the machine gun was fired, these shells came out, about 100 of them per machine gun, and they were little tiny arrows about 1.5 inches long, and there were 100 of them in each one of the shells, and they would fly out into the jungle. And if one of them happened to center on a tree, it would cut the tree in half. And this young man somehow got separated from his group, and he came in late in the dark, and they had these moments, these fire moments, and they would fire these machine guns all around the fire base at different times and in different places in order to keep the Viet Cong from infiltrating the fire base. They did it every night, and it was never at the same time. This young man knew that, but he wanted to get back on base, and he came at night. And when he did, they opened up with fire, and he got behind a tree, and one of the arrows, just one of the arrows, hit him right here, went inside his chest and into his heart and into his ventricle. And in the ventricle, there's little tendons called chorda tendineae that attach to the mitral valve. And it lodged itself in those tendons. He was still alive. And he was sent to our hospital immediately by helicopter. We took an x-ray. We saw that arrow. It was only that big, but we knew if it got dislodged, it would kill him. In order to get that arrow out, he needed a heart-lung machine. There was no heart-lung machine in all of Vietnam. So we put him on a helicopter with a couple of medical personnel. We flew him to Ton Son Air Force Base just outside of Saigon, and there he was put on a jet, and he was flown all the way to Hawaii. When he got to Hawaii, the operating room was all set up with a heart-lung machine and cardiac surgeons. He was put on the table, put on the machine, his heart was opened up, the arrow was taken out, probably given to him as a souvenir, and his heart was closed up, and he was back to normal. What was the effect of this in Vietnam? That's a lot of expense, a lot of time to take care of one soldier. You have no idea the level of morale that this increased throughout Vietnam in all the soldiers to know that we were willing to do the very best we could, no matter what the expense, to take care of a wounded soldier. For those of you who don't know, during the war in Korea, we had some very, very old anesthesia machines, and some that could cause disaster. This machine that's behind me was developed for the Vietnam War. I'm going to demonstrate to you the use of the U.S. military field anesthesia machine, model 775. This was designed for the Vietnam War. It's designed so it can be shipped anywhere by helicopter or otherwise. It can also be dropped 50 feet from a helicopter and not be damaged. And it was used extensively throughout the Vietnam War in many, many fire bases that had surgery units, as well as in big hospitals like the 24th Evacuation Hospital that I served in. First of all, you have to undo snaps that hold this top on both sides. Then you lift this up so it divides it into two pieces. In this piece over here is stored the respirator, which we will demonstrate in a moment, and it holds the tubes that carry the air and the anesthetic to the patient. We'll assemble those in just a moment. In this half is the operation port of the field anesthesia machine, and it pulls up in one section. Has a knob that holds this. This is the working part of the anesthesia machine. These are the flow meters for nitrous oxide, for a gas called cyclopropane, which is no longer used anywhere in the United States for anesthesia. This is the oxygen gas in the back, or the attachments for the cylinders that hold the oxygen and the nitrous oxide, and they would be stored here, and then a special attachment that comes and holds onto here. The front part of the anesthesia machine has valves so that the gas, the anesthetic gas, as well as the oxygen, can only go one way. You then attach this to here, and this is the resuscitator bag, and it is attached here. And in the back are two containers, and they hold absorbent for carbon dioxide. So when the patient breathes out, the carbon dioxide is absorbed into these granules, and these have to be replaced when they turn blue. And to the front, we add one of two things. One is the mask that will be put on the patient like this, when you'll notice that this is moving. Once the patient is asleep and then paralyzed with a special drug that we use in anesthesia, you can then take this off, connect it where it was, and then after you have put an endotracheal tube into the trachea through the mouth using a laryngoscope, you can then attach this to the breathing machine. Now we have this into the trachea, which would be like this, and we would then ventilate the patient with the bag, or in this particular machine that has a small respirator, and it works like this. It attaches at the top here and goes much like the one you use in the fireplace to keep the fire going. Up and down, up and down. If that's what you wish to do, you can either do it that way, or you can squeeze the bag here. Or if you have what's called a portable ventilator, which has also been made, you can attach it to right here and take this bag off, and it will continue to respire the patient during the operation. As I said before, when I discovered I had PTSD and I started working with a therapist, he told me that because of my training in medicine and because I had written other papers, that it probably would be a good thing if I wrote down my memories, because that would help me see that they were memories. As I put them on paper, they kind of became more positive to me, that they were good experiences. I hope that if they read my book, as I said before, I hope they will have a feeling that doctors and nurses were serving because that's where they were assigned to be and did not go to Canada to get away from their responsibility. I hope that as they read this, they will be able to better understand what casualty means, what it means to live the rest of your life with half a leg or no legs, half an arm or no arms, and also to remember those on the wall in Washington, D.C. that gave their lives in order to preserve our country. As I look back, I think that I would tell young doctors and young nurses to think about the great privilege they have of going and being trained as doctors and nurses, and what they owe the public and the government that helps pay for their education, and for the great privilege they have of learning about how to take care of people. I think that would help young people, especially if they go to war and have to be separated from their families, to survive and to have a positive experience in the combat zone. We serve a different role in a combat zone, but we serve a role that is paramount in keeping the morale of our soldiers up, and a hope that if they are wounded in any way, that they have a good chance of returning home to their families and loved ones.